A stray dog risked his life to save a child from a devastating fire. Injured and abandoned, his heroic act revealed a moving past and transformed the destiny of everyone around him. A story of courage, gratitude, and unexpected connections that proves the greatest heroes emerge in the most desperate moments. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey that will warm your heart. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. What if the fate of an entire family depended on the burnt paws of an animal society chose to ignore? In a world where we often turn our backs on those who need help the most, sometimes it's precisely the forgotten ones who become the greatest heroes. The town of Maple Creek was one of those places you've probably driven through without noticing. Simple houses lined cobblestone streets. People greeted each other by name on Sunday mornings, and time seemed to pass more slowly than in the rest of the country. But it was in this seemingly ordinary setting that an extraordinary story began to unfold on a summer afternoon no one would ever forget. The sun beat down on the asphalt as Helen, a dedicated 32-year-old nurse, kissed little Sophia's forehead before leaving for another double shift at the County General Hospital. Her eyes, though tired from a restless night, still managed to convey the silent promise all mothers make. "I'll be back soon." The babysitter, Mrs. Cecilia, a trusted elderly woman from the neighborhood, waved from the door while Sophia, with her 6 years and an imagination bigger than the backyard, was already planning her day's adventures among dolls and colorful drawings. No one could imagine that hours later, the Maple Creek sky would be pierced by the unmistakable wail of fire engine sirens. It was the forgotten candle on Mrs. Cecilia's bedroom dresser that first fed the small flame. Perhaps it was an unplanned nap, perhaps a moment of distraction. The cotton curtain was the first to yield, then the old wallpaper, and soon the fire spread with a voracity that seemed to have a life of its own, consuming decades of memories. In minutes, Sophia was playing in her room when the first wisp of smoke crept under the door. It was the strange smell that alerted her first. That wasn't the aroma of the cornbread cake Mrs. Cecilia used to make on Tuesday afternoons. It was something more threatening, something that made her little heart race even before her childish mind could comprehend the danger. Meanwhile, on the streets near the house, a caramel-colored dog with wise eyes lifted his snout. He was one of those dogs the whole town recognized, but nobody really knew. Some called him the yellow one from the square, others the caramel from the market, but most didn't even bother to name him. He was just that mutt that's always around. He lived on scraps and the sporadic kindness of local shopkeepers, slept under different awnings each night, and had somehow turned the entire town into his territory. What no one knew was that this dog, seemingly ordinary in his state of abandonment, had extraordinarily sharp senses. And that afternoon, something in the air bothered him deeply. It wasn't just the smell of smoke. The bakery chimneys and occasional bonfires were part of his reality. It was something more alarming, something that made him abandon the bone he was calmly chewing on the sidewalk by the pharmacy. With determined steps, he began to run towards the blue 2-story house on Magnolia Street. His instincts guided him like an invisible radar. His quick trot soon turned into a desperate sprint, as if every second was too precious to waste. Smoke was already escaping through the window cracks when he arrived. Neighbors were starting to notice the acrid smell in the air, but hadn't yet identified its exact source. The dog, however, knew exactly where the danger lurked. He positioned himself in front of the gate of Helen's house and began barking with an urgency he had never shown before. The desperate barking caught the attention of a neighbor, who finally spotted the smoke now billowing out in worrying volume. "Fire! The nurse's house is on fire!" he shouted, running to try and help. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed while someone frantically called the fire department. Inside the house, Sophia's situation was rapidly deteriorating. Mrs. Cecilia had collapsed downstairs, overcome by smoke while trying to find an exit. The little girl, scared and confused, huddled in the farthest corner of her room, clutching her stuffed rabbit, as if the toy could protect her from the heat that grew with every moment. Outside, desperation grew in proportion to the flames. "The girl is still inside, and the babysitter too," neighbors shouted. Some men tried to enter through the front door but were repelled by the intensity of the fire. It was as if hell itself had chosen that house for its earthly manifestation. It was at this critical moment, when time seemed frozen in a collective nightmare, that the caramel mutt did something no one expected. With a surprising leap for an animal his size, he jumped through the broken back window, a security flaw Helen always promised to fix with her next paycheck. The remaining glass cut one of his paws, but he seemed not to notice, driven by a determination that defied the logic of self-preservation. Inside the house, the heat was suffocating. The air, heavy with smoke and toxins, would be lethal to any human exposed for more than a few minutes. For a dog whose lung capacity is significantly smaller, it was an invitation to certain death. But he didn't hesitate. With his snout close to the floor, where the air was still minimally breathable, he began his search. He first found Mrs. Cecilia's inert body. He tried to pull her by the sleeve of her dress, but she was too heavy for him to move. After a few frustrated attempts, he seemed to make an impossible calculation. Time was running out for everyone in the house. He needed to find the child. Climbing the stairs was like ascending into the epicenter of hell. Each step brought him closer to the unbearable heat of the second floor. His paws burned with every step on the superheated floor, but he continued, moved by a purpose that transcended pain. Sophia was no longer crying. The scarce oxygen and toxic smoke had driven her into a state of semi-consciousness that precedes eternal sleep. It was her small, huddled body that the dog found, guided perhaps by the same instinct that weeks earlier had made him dodge a speeding car, or that alerted him to which people to avoid on the city streets. What happened next would defy the understanding of everyone who witnessed it. With impressive gentleness, the dog grasped the collar of Sophia's dress with his teeth and began to pull her. The girl, on the threshold of consciousness, felt the movement and opened her eyes slightly. Instead of fear, she felt a strange comfort seeing those determined brown eyes looking at her. Instinctively, she clung to the animal's neck, facilitating the rescue. The dog, now with a partially conscious Sophia clinging to him, needed to find an escape route. The stairs he had climbed were now completely engulfed in flames. Only one alternative remained: the master bedroom balcony, from where they might be seen by the rescuers who were already arriving. With a superhuman, or perhaps super canine effort, he dragged and guided Sophia through the smoky hallway to the balcony. The relatively cleaner oxygen in that open space was like a miraculous elixir for the girl's lungs, who began to cough and cry simultaneously, precious signs that she was still alive. The firefighters, who had just arrived, immediately spotted the small figure and her unlikely protector on the balcony. "There, second floor. There's a child and a dog," one of them shouted, already positioning the ladder. The rescue was swift, yet it seemed like an eternity to everyone watching, especially to Helen, who had arrived from the hospital minutes earlier, alerted by a desperate call from a neighbor. The image of her daughter descending in the strong arms of a firefighter, followed by the visibly limping caramel dog, would forever be etched in the town's collective memory. The moment Sophia was placed on the ambulance gurney, her small fingers still tightly gripped the singed fur of her unlikely savior, as if even in safety she didn't want to be separated from the presence that represented her survival. Helen ran to embrace her daughter, her nurse's uniform still dirty from the hospital rush, now mixing with soot and tears. My love," she repeated, like a mantra that could undo all the horror of that afternoon. Sophia, between coughing fits, could only say one thing: "Mommy, the dog. He saved me. He showed me the way." It was only then that Helen truly noticed the animal standing a few steps away, observing the scene with a silent dignity that contrasted with his deplorable physical state. His paws were visibly burned, dark patches marked his once golden fur, and a deep cut bled from his right front paw. But his eyes, those eyes held a lucidity and intelligence Helen had never seen in an animal. "He needs help," she told the paramedics already attending to Sophia and Mrs. Cecilia, who fortunately had been rescued alive by the firefighters. "This dog saved my daughter. He needs a vet now." The small veterinary clinic in town usually closed at 6 p.m., But that day, Dr. Michael didn't think twice about reopening when he received the call. "Bring him in immediately," was all he said upon hearing the unbelievable story. The diagnosis for the dog, whom Sophia insisted on calling Hero, a name that would quickly become official, was discouraging. Besides the second-degree burns on his paws and muzzle, he suffered from chronic malnutrition, had intestinal worms, an old respiratory infection, and would need constant medication for at least 3 months. The cut on his paw required stitches and could leave permanent effects on his mobility. The cost of the full treatment was prohibitive for Helen, who was already facing the prospect of rebuilding her partially destroyed home with the small insurance policy she had taken out years before. "I'll pay what I can now, and the rest in installments," she told Dr. Michael, determined not to abandon her daughter's savior. "This dog risked his life for Sophia. The least I can do is make sure he has a chance to survive." News of the heroic rescue spread quickly through the small town, first through corner conversations, then the local newspaper, and finally social media. It was Marianne, Helen's colleague at the hospital and a fervent internet user, who had the idea. "Let's start an online fundraiser for Hero's treatment," she suggested, already imagining the story's potential. The campaign began modestly, with an emotional text and a few photos of the dog at the vet clinic, taken with Helen's phone. The initial goal was just to cover the most urgent medical costs. No one was prepared for what happened next. In less than 24 hours, Hero's story had crossed the borders of Maple Creek. An influencer with millions of followers shared the fundraiser, linked with the caption, "This stray dog is more of a hero than many humans out there. Let's help him." The post went viral instantly. 3 days later, the campaign had already raised 3 times the amount needed for Hero's complete treatment. Donations poured in from all over the country, accompanied by emotional messages. "I had to help. I have a daughter Sophia's age. This dog made me believe in kindness again. My mother was saved from a fire when she was a child." This story touched me deeply. For Helen, this sudden solidarity was almost as overwhelming as the fire. In 1 week, her life had been completely transformed. Her house was partially destroyed, her daughter was still recovering from respiratory trauma in the hospital, and now she found herself at the center of a wave of national attention she had never sought. "What are we going to do with the extra money?" asked Marianne, equally surprised by the campaign's success. Helen had no doubts. "First, ensure Hero gets the best possible treatment. Then start the house repairs. And if there's anything left, I want to create a fund for other abandoned animals in town. Nobody ever cared about Hero until he saved my daughter. How many other invisible dogs are out there needing a chance?" Hero's recovery was slow and painful. The burns on his paws required daily dressings, and he needed to be fed a special diet to regain his ideal weight. Helen, dividing her time between the hospital where she worked, visits to Sophia, who would be discharged in a few days, and caring for the dog, barely had time to breathe. But not once did she consider giving up. It was during one of the bandage changes that Dr. Michael made a surprising discovery. "Helen, come see this," he called, passing the microchip scanner over Hero's neck. The small device beeped, and an identification number appeared on the screen. "He has a microchip. This means Hero isn't just any stray dog, he belonged to someone." That revelation hit Helen like a bombshell. Suddenly, the possibility arose that her Hero had a family somewhere, people who might be looking for him. Part of her feared losing this newly formed bond, but her integrity spoke louder. "We need to find out who he belongs to," she stated, a lump in her throat. The search for Hero's original owner wasn't difficult. The microchip registration system revealed he had been registered under the name Anthony Miller, a 78-year-old man who lived on the other side of town. A quick additional search, however, brought the information that Anthony had passed away 6 months earlier. "Maybe there are relatives," suggested Dr. Michael, equally invested in the extraordinary dog's story. A few more calls revealed that Anthony's only living relative was his grandson, Gabriel, a 28-year-old veterinarian working at a renowned clinic in the state capital, 4 hours away. "I'll contact him," offered Dr. Michael, feeling connected to the story through his professional role. The call to Gabriel was brief but impactful. Upon hearing about Hero, whom he had known as Buddy, the young veterinarian fell silent for several seconds, trying to process the information. "My grandfather loved that dog more than anything," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "He disappeared during the wake. We searched for weeks, put up posters, but eventually had to accept that maybe he didn't want to be found. Who could have imagined?" His voice broke again. Without hesitation, Gabriel informed them he would be in Maple Creek the next day. "I need to see Hero. I need to see what he did." The anticipation of that meeting kept Helen awake all night. What if the grandson decided to take Hero away? Legally, he had every right. The animal belonged to his family. But how would she explain that to Sophia, who was already planning where Hero's bed would go in her room once they could both return home? The young man who got out of the car the next morning in front of the veterinary clinic had red eyes, like someone who had spent the entire trip oscillating between tears and smiles, tall, broad-shouldered, and with the same kind eyes that people said were his grandfather's trademark. Gabriel entered the waiting room with hesitant steps. Helen and Sophia were already there, the girl still wearing a small oxygen mask she needed intermittently. "We come visit Hero every day," Helen explained, extending her hand to Gabriel. "His story with Buddy, it took us all by surprise." Gabriel shook her offered hand, but his eyes were already searching for the dog. When Dr. Michael brought Hero into the room, wearing special paw protectors to keep the bandages from coming loose, time seemed to stand still. The dog, usually alert and protective near Sophia, suddenly froze. His muzzle trembled slightly, and his eyes fixed on the figure of the newcomer. "Buddy," Gabriel called softly, kneeling. "It's me, remember?" What happened next brought tears, even to Dr. Michael, who thought he had seen everything in his 20 years of practice. Hero, ignoring his injured paws, launched himself towards Gabriel with a whine that was pure canine emotion. He frantically licked the young man's face, who hugged him tightly, burying his face in the animal's fur. "He remembers me," Gabriel murmured, between tears of joy. "After all this time, after everything he's been through, he still remembers." Sophia watched the scene with a mixture of joy and apprehension. Her little heart seemed to understand what this reunion meant. Tugging at her mother's sleeve, she asked in a low voice audible to everyone in the room, "Is he going to take Hero away, Mommy?" The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Gabriel looked at the little girl, then at Helen, then at the dog, who continued to show his joy at seeing him again. The decision he had to make was complex and fraught with emotion. "Sophia," he began, approaching the girl with Hero still stuck to his legs. "Your friend here was my grandfather's best friend too. They were inseparable. When my grandfather left, Hero couldn't bear to stay in that house without him. That's why he ran away." Helen held her breath, bracing herself for what was coming next. She tried mentally formulating what she would say to her daughter when the inevitable happened. "But now," Gabriel continued, "he found you, and he did something so incredible, so brave, that I'm sure my grandfather would be proud." He paused, looking directly into Sophia's eyes. "You know what my grandfather always used to say? That dogs choose their people, and Hero clearly chose you, Sophia." The understanding of what Gabriel was saying took a few seconds to hit Helen. "You're not taking him?" she asked almost disbelievingly. Gabriel smiled with that smile that could melt hearts in the coming months. "I couldn't separate these two even if I wanted to," he replied, gesturing towards Sophia and Hero. "But if you'll allow me, I'd like to visit him, to keep my grandfather's memory alive. And maybe if you need it, I can help with his treatment. After all, I'm a vet." Gabriel's offer to help with Hero's treatment was just the beginning of his increasing involvement in Helen and Sophia's lives. As the weeks passed, his visits became more frequent, extending beyond caring for the dog. He helped rebuild the fire-damaged house, offered emotional support when Sophia faced recurring nightmares, and became a constant presence at Sunday dinners. To outside observers, it was clear that something more was blossoming there. The way Helen's eyes sparkled when Gabriel arrived, the way he always found an excuse to call just to check on Hero, the conversations that stretched late into the night while the dog slept peacefully at their feet. 3 months after the fire, news arrived like a ray of hope for the small town. A new veterinary clinic would open in Maple Creek, the first specializing in rescued animals. The director? Gabriel Miller, who surprised colleagues and family by abandoning his promising career in the state capital to settle in this small town. "It's crazy," he confessed to Helen the night he made the decision. "Leaving a stable job, an excellent salary to start from scratch here. But these past months I've understood what my grandfather always said about this place. There's something special here, something worth preserving." What he didn't say, but they both knew, was that this something special had a lot to do with the shyly smiling nurse and her courageous daughter. The clinic's opening coincided with Hero's full recovery. The burns on his paws had healed better than expected, although a slight limp remained as a permanent reminder of his heroic act. The new clinic quickly became a landmark not only for Maple Creek but for the entire region, attracting people seeking specialized treatment for their animals. But the real revolution came 3 months later, when Gabriel and Helen announced the ICR expansion of the space to include the Healing Paws Project, a therapeutic center where children with emotional trauma could interact with rescued animals. The idea was born after they observed how Sophia recovered more quickly from nightmares when Hero was nearby. Animals have a sensitivity that we humans sometimes lose in the hustle and bustle of life, Gabriel explained in an interview with the local newspaper. They don't judge, they don't demand, they just offer unconditional love. For children who have gone through traumatic experiences, this kind of connection can be transformative. Sophia, now 7 years old and fully recovered physically from the fire, became the project's junior assistant, helping other children connect with the animals. Seeing her daughter flourish in this way was, for Helen, confirmation that even tragedies can give birth to wonderful new beginnings. However, not everything was perfect on their new path. Helen began facing problems at the hospital where she worked. With the chronic shortage of nurses, management started pressuring her to work increasingly longer overtime hours, incompatible with the care Sophia still needed. Furthermore, some colleagues, resentful of the local media attention she received because of Hero's story, began spreading rumors about the money raised in the online fundraiser. "They say you bought a new car," commented a colleague, feigning casual interest, "and that you're renovating the house very luxuriously, while we barely have supplies to work with here." The baseless accusations hurt Helen deeply. The extra money from the campaign had been fully used for Hero's treatment, the basic reconstruction of the house, which was still far from complete, and the creation of a small fund for abandoned animals in the city. Her car was still the same 15-year-old Ford Escort she drove before the fire. Gabriel, noticing the emotional toll this situation was taking, made a proposal that would once again change the course of their story. "Why don't you come work with me at the clinic?" he suggested during a dinner where Helen had broken down in tears after another difficult day at the hospital. "You have an amazing way with animals, and the Healing Paws Project needs someone to coordinate the human side. Your experience as a nurse would be perfect." The idea seemed absurd at first. Helen had never formally worked with animals. Her entire career and training were focused on human care. But the more she thought about it, the more the proposal made sense. It would mean more flexible hours, allowing her to be more present in Sophia's life. The work environment would be incomparably healthier, and above all, she would be contributing to a project she believed in deeply. "But what if I'm not good at it?" she questioned, insecure. Caring for people is different from caring for animals and traumatized children. Gabriel smiled, holding her hands across the table. "Helen, I saw how you treated Hero from day one, even when he was just a burnt and injured stray dog. I see how you connect the children who visit the clinic with the right animals for each one. You can't teach that in college. It's a gift." 2 weeks later, Helen resigned from the hospital and began her new professional journey. The transition wasn't easy. Learning new protocols, understanding animal behavior, studying therapeutic techniques. But for the first time in years, She felt she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The Healing Paws project quickly gained regional recognition. Children who didn't respond to conventional therapies began showing progress after a few sessions with the rescued animals. Hero, in particular, demonstrated extraordinary sensitivity with the most difficult cases, as if he could sense exactly where the emotional pain lay in each child who arrived. "It's like he's lived enough to understand others' suffering," commented a psychologist who monitored the project. "The way he slowly approaches some children, but energetically launches himself towards others. It's as if he knows exactly what each one needs." 1 year after the fire that nearly took Sophia's life, Maple Creek was a transformed town. The municipal stray animal care program, inspired by Hero's story, had drastically reduced the number of abandoned dogs and cats. Gabriel's clinic now employed 3 full-time veterinarians, plus a multidisciplinary team for the therapeutic project. And most importantly, a new family had formed. Helen and Gabriel announced their engagement in a simple ceremony in the garden of the rebuilt house. It was no surprise to anyone when Hero appeared carrying the rings in a small pouch, attached to his collar, led by a radiant Sophia in her flower girl dress. Some would say this was all coincidence. Gabriel addressed the gathered guests, then fixed his eyes on his fiancée. A lost dog, a tragic fire, a microchip that reconnected us. But my grandfather always said that coincidences are just the universe being subtle in its miracles. And this one, he smiled, stroking Hero's head, is a miracle I will be eternally grateful for. The story of the caramel dog who risked his own life to save an unknown child continues to inspire people far beyond the borders of Maple Creek. At adoption fairs across the country, volunteers share the Hero case to raise awareness among potential adopters. Schools invite Helen, Gabriel, and even Hero himself, now sporting an official city medal for bravery, to speak about compassion and courage. But perhaps the greatest legacy of this extraordinary story lies not in the projects, medals, or news reports. It lies in the exchanged glances between Sophia and her furry protector on stormy nights, when she still occasionally wakes up scared. It lies in the community that learned to see value where before there was only abandonment. It lies in the transformation of a tragedy into a new beginning. And above all, it lies in the silent lesson that a simple stray dog taught an entire town. That sometimes the greatest heroes come from the most unlikely origins, and that love, whether human or canine, has the power to rebuild not just houses, but entire lives. In the words painted on the colorful wall of the Healing Paws project, under the framed photo of a caramel dog with wise eyes, when all seems lost, look into the eyes of those society has forgotten. True courage often hides in the most unexpected places. Time passes differently in Maple Creek. The seasons come and go, bringing rain, flowers, heat, and wind. But some stories remain eternal in the collective heart. And as long as there is a child being rescued from their own inner turmoil by the unconditional love of a rescued animal, the flame ignited by Hero will never die out. Because in the end, true courage isn't found in grand, isolated, heroic acts, although Sophia's rescue certainly was one, but in daily persistence, in the ability to keep moving forward even when everything seems lost. That's what Hero did during the months he wandered alone after his first owner's death. That's what Helen did, rebuilding her and her daughter's life from the ashes of her home. That's what Gabriel did, abandoning comfort for the uncertainty of a new beginning. And that's what each of us can do daily, by choosing to see beyond appearances, by lending a hand or a paw to those in need, even when no one is looking. Because we never know when a simple act of kindness might trigger a revolution of hope. At the dawn of another day in Maple Creek, a caramel dog, his fur slightly grayed at the paws, stretches slowly, gets up from his comfortable bed, and walks to the window. The slight limp in his right paw is almost unnoticeable now. His deep, wise brown eyes watch the rising sun, while in the background, the sounds of a waking family fill the air with the sweetest melody he has ever known. Who would have thought that the destiny of so many lives could change with 4 burnt paws and a heart bigger than the world?